I'm going to try and talk a bit about the relationship between social and emotional learning and well-being, but focusing more on the well-being aspect. And here's a diagram to kind of try and help us think about how to do that. So I thought a lot about this, knowing that Mark and I will be on together, actually. So the concept of well-being was actually invented by the World Health Organization in 1948. And what the World Health Organization meant then was that well-being, as they put it, was a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This was very important when the World Health Organization started it for two reasons. One is new occupations sprung up because of it, like school counselors, for example, who never existed before this proclamation by the WHO. And the WHO's work was part of really a global reconstruction after World War II with other organizations like the International Monetary Fund and the United Nations to create together global health, peace, and security, and economic development as well. So well-being was a view not only of individuals and small groups, but a view of society. And social and emotional learning is a significant part of the kind that Mark has talked about, and possibly I'd like to suggest is a way of thinking. What are the skills, the strategies, the ways of being that we can deliberately create through interventions, programs, and support that will contribute to that wider framework of well-being. Now, because Mark and I are on together, I thought quite hard about how big these two circles should be in relation to each other. And I thought the bigger I made the SEL circle, the more that Mark would go into the green and the yellow space. And the smaller I made the SEL circle, the more that Mark might go into the red and the blue space. But so I don't know how big these circles should be in relation to each other, but it's a way to think about it. And as we've seen from Iceland, their attempt to improve well-being is both focusing on interventions like case study workers, SEL, but also introducing more leisure activities for young people to engage physically with each other outside, a kind of broader view of well-being. So these things are not either or. These things are both and. But that's very important because sometimes they can rub up against each other. For example, in one school district in Ontario, I'll talk about Ontario in a few minutes, we discovered that 600 teachers were doing online courses in mindfulness. Now, which the district helped support. And at one level, this is great. But when we looked at charts that people in these districts produced for us about what was going on in their districts, this was the most off the chart ADHD chaotic portrayal of multiple initiatives coming at teachers from the top out of all the 10 districts. So we didn't just need teachers to be doing programs in mindfulness here. We needed the district to be thinking about how it was organizing teachers' work and managing change at a policy level. And sometimes they actually come into conflict, so that, for example, Prime Minister David Cameron in England actually invited Martin Seligman over to talk about his positive psychology framework for improving people's well-being at the very same time that he had cut municipality city budgets by 50% in ways that were described by the UN poverty envoy as being practically criminal. And in fact, when you registered for unemployment, you had to show that you were prepared to undergo cognitive therapy in order to get your benefits. So these things at their best are nested within each other, but sometimes can a little bit come into tension with each other. And we have to think about that. All right, here we go. Come on. Yeah. So this is what's happened to well-being with the rise of it over since 1947, 48. And we see a huge surge in about the past 20 and particularly the past 10 years. We've seen the growth of spas, of gyms, of health products, celebrities getting in on the act, Gwyneth Paltrow, Goldie Hawn, lots of others as well. We've also seen people more willing to open up and talk about their mental health issues, including sports stars, movie stars. So where's all this coming from then, this surge of interest in wellness and well-being? Well, in education, in our book, Dennis Shirley and I described this as almost like two tectonic plates coming together that we call germ, and after the business literature, VUCA. So germ basically is, let me go back. A germ is what our Finnish colleague Pasi Selberg calls the global education reform movement. This, through the 1980s, 90s, into the 2000s, was a movement making people feel overly controlled. Punitive inspection systems in England, top-down accountability in America, high-stakes standardized testing, particularly in a lot of the English-speaking countries. Now, many people think you can't do anything about this. Some people, not Mark, in positive psychology say, well, you know, we can't change the system, but we can change how we think about the system or how we respond to the system. Well, we can actually change the system. We had one superintendent stand up in his district in Northern Ontario, 50% Indigenous, and say to his teachers, I don't give a rodent's bottom about the test scores in this district. Now, I didn't actually say rodent's bottom. He said something slightly more rude than that, and you can probably guess what it was. But his teachers applauded him when he had the courage to stand up to the cruel and unusual punishments that the standardized testing system was inflicting upon them. And I've worked as an advisor with the Premier of Ontario, 4 and then 6 advisors, actually as a result of our data showing how standardized testing creates ill-being, to actually initiate a review of standardized testing and her support for its abolition completely until grade 6. So you can do something about the systems as well as how we respond to the systems. And the other one is VUCA. VUCA is volatility, uncertainty, chaos, and ambiguity. VUCA is climate change. VUCA is the pandemic. VUCA is Black Lives Matter. VUCA is Brexit. VUCA are the kind of digital excesses that Mark talks about in his book, Running Out of Control, and people on Instagram into the late hours of the night. VUCA is the collapse of democracy all around the world. This is VUCA, a survey of 10 countries last month, young people aged 16 to 25, showed that 77% of them are afraid of the future. This is coming from somewhere, and we need to do something about it. And young people want to be engaged. And part of that well-being is assisting that engagement. So in around 2014, Dennis Shirley and I were working with 10 school districts in Ontario in collaborative research, when out came this policy on achieving excellence. Kathleen Wynne, the new Premier, was transitioning the province that was a bit germ-like, focusing on literacy, numeracy, testing, and targets. And as a lesbian grandmother with a master's degree in Indigenous languages, she was very concerned about bullying and marginalization of many minority group students within the province. So we followed, we didn't initiate, but we followed where where the policy was going, where the systems were going, where the teachers were going. We got into well-being because of them, not before them. But luckily, I'd done research about 15 years before on the emotions of teaching. I'd read my Damasio and my Darwin and my Lazarus, and not yet my Brackett, but I've got there now. And so I had a bit of a head start in helping our teachers. And we found, so we weren't looking at, teachers really wanted to do things about well-being. So in many of our participating systems here, we're not looking at systems that are opposed to well-being or nervous about it or anxious about social and emotional learning. Teachers were hungry for it. We've seen this in our work currently in Nova Scotia as well. One of the first things they want to do to improve things for their children is not raise test scores, but actually enhance and support their well-being. So these are lots of the things we saw teachers doing in school in response to the well-being agenda. And I won't go through them, you can see them all, but I'll mention one or two. Student mental health groups, which had students with mental health issues, speech impediments, friends who committed suicide. A student designed mental health alert app. So if a student had an issue with mental health, a friend could contact a teacher or a counselor. Lots of 9 different programs of emotional regulation going on in the province at the same time. Climbing walls in classroom for kids with fetal alcohol syndromes. Charts that the kids produced at 6 saying they were tired, TIRD, or hyper, HPR, just like documenting, naming, understanding their emotions. So lots of social and emotional learning going on. But let me show you this chart again and ask you, just for 10 seconds, look at that. This is CASTLE that Mark is involved with, the Center for Social and Emotional Learning. What is missing in this chart? Because this is what we explored with our teachers in our districts as we were critical friends with them. What is missing? So here's Ontario's framework for well-being. And it's like the bigger circle outside SEL. What's missing is the social, not just the interactive, but the societal. What is the role of well-being in society? The physical aspects of well-being. United States has one of the highest rates of obesity in the world, for example. And Mark talks about obesity issues in his book. What are countries doing about physical health? And spirituality, which comes from Canada's growing concern with Indigenous well-being. But it's at the center because what Ontario says is what's essential for Indigenous students' sense of spirituality is good for all students. And so we need to pay attention not only to the interactive, the emotional and the social, but also to the societal, the physical and the spiritual in terms of well-being. So in our book, Dennis Shirley and I talk about these 3 things, and this is how I'll close, as these movements, so almost volcanic, that are opportunities coming out of this VUCA and germ, too much control and feeling out of control, a kind of torture. This is how we torture people all together at the same time. And what can we do collectively in order to respond to this, as well as social and emotional learning? Well, one is, and you've heard this from me before within ARC, so this is quite quick, is to talk about prosperity of life, not austerity of budgets or even growth of budgets. And this can mean many things, but one of them would be, next to the bottom, infusing more learning with meaning and purpose. What kind of learning do kids do? What kind of projects do kids do? What do they focus on? We saw children adopting a refugee family, interacting with them and learning about their culture. We saw schools partnering with their local trades union and having marches for mental health awareness. We saw studies of water quality in Indigenous and white suburban communities. So many projects of this kind. One way to get well is to be engaged with the world and to care about it and feel that you are an actor and not only somebody who is resilient or responsive or trying to cope at the same time. Second, we talk about ethical technology. We have a charter for this in our center, Tristan and I, in Shanine at the University of Ottawa, which includes every school district, every government, and every technology company that we trade with, having a clear and transparent strategy on ethical uses of technology, including managing risks, digital addiction, online bullying, excessive screen time, and so on. We only trade with tech companies who have a policy on this, and tech companies become like organic food, which is we drive changes in the market by changing our attitudes to them. Notice holding our hands up saying it's a pity about these parents, it's a pity about the kids, let's change their behavior on tech. No, let's also change the approaches and the strategies of the tech companies, the school districts, and the schools. And if this sounds pie in the sky, Tristan and I have a new project of $2.7 million from the Lego Foundation to develop a network of playful schools in Canada. And one thing we'll be doing is advancing this charter with them all across Canada collectively as a systemic change. And last but not least is restorative nature. One thing we learned during the pandemic is that actually you can deal with social distancing by learning outside. Restorative nature is when you exercise physically. Again, Mark talks about this. It's good for the neurons. It enhances cognitive learning and success. It improves well-being. It connects us with our Indigenous heritage, and it creates the foundations for sustainability and caring about climate change. I was on with ASCD a few days ago, and one of the principals said in question time, well, where can we get money for, we can get money for technology. Where can we get money for connecting more with nature? And our response is, open the door. It's free. Just spend less time on testing, less time sitting down, less time on technology and screen time, and more time moving around. So to go back to the beginning, social and emotional learning, well-being, they're both important. It's not an either or, it's a both and. Pay attention to both. And we will, we can, we should, we must not only create more children who are well, more families who are well, but a world that is a better place for them to be well in too.